So hi everybody, can I just get a hands up? Who was here this time last year or approximately? Who saw me speak at the Digital University last year? Okay, oh that's highly convenient, okay. So last year when I was here, I was speaking in the capacity of doing a big corporate innovation project for a publishing company here. Through a merger. And it was a very interesting experience because it had been many years since I was in Poland. In the 90s, I was working here at intervals as we had launched in multiple countries, Central Europe's first independent business newspaper called the Warsaw, Prague and Budapest Business Journal. So my history in Central Europe in media goes back to business journalism and started in English language print, which was basically all about bringing transparency to business news in Central Europe. So most of you weren't even born then, let's make that assumption. But at that time, I was coming from Ireland, a place where there was a huge economic recession that had gone on for many years. And these markets in 92, 93, 94 were, needless to say, very much, well, in their infancy as free economies. So in my role in dealing with corporate innovation and in dealing with media primarily, which is my passion, and actually my passion is really magazines, but of course that's a whole other category of discussion. You know, I've seen an awful lot of things happen. I've seen the emergence of retail. I've seen the influence of digital. I've seen the ups and downs of digital transformation. I've seen the ups and downs of the economic forces of changes in exchange rates. And many other attributes of change. So I remember saying last year in a board meeting, you know, not one year has ever been the same for me in the last 25 years that I've been working in these markets. And it's for this reason, actually, that I believe that there are a lot of things that can be learned and an awful lot of lessons that can be applied to what is now the digital single market, which is a newly emerging market in Europe. And it's another reason why I believe in the power of Central Europeans to actually really transform the world and embrace their unique capability, which is their ability to resist and move with the fast-paced pace of change that we're dealing with now. When I made my presentation last year here, I thought I was talking about the future as I would see it 2 years from now. And I was just saying it to Greg from SAS that I'm amazed that it was like the future has already arrived and it's been 10 months. So even me, I need to keep myself ahead of the game. So to do that, I'm doing a course in Stanford in corporate innovation, and I'm also working on a project with Enterprise Ireland in their high competitive startup fund. So a lot of things, I would say, if you can't innovate yourselves, I mean, the first message I would give to you today, if you want to talk about disruption in media, you have to, if you're in media and interested, the thing is you have to disrupt yourself. You need to become a permanently learning agent so that you can have a chance to keep up pace. But I'd also suggest, before I jump in, that it's also really useful to be a surfer. Who surfs? Not the internet, but on boards in the sea. Okay, I'd highly suggest that you start to learn, because I'm a really bad surfer, but I started to learn about 5-6 years ago. And one of the things that I had to learn was to be comfortable in water well out of my depth. I had to also learn to conserve energy. I had to learn to identify the wave that was commensurate with my capabilities, and to focus all my energy on capturing that in the full knowledge that I might be wiped out in the process. And I have to get back on the board and start again. So this is the summarized lesson that I would give you today. So it would be convenient if my little clicker was working, so sorry about that. Hold on one second. So let's do it the manual way. So these are some of the words that have actually popped up in the last 10 months. These words, I'm not going to go into detail, but I mean, obviously data, everybody knows it's important. We always were dealing with subscribers, but this is a different type of data. Collaborative economy, echo chambers. I mean, 4 years ago, I was fighting against the whole domination of Kim Kardashian, saying she's not telling the truth to young women. And now look what we have over in America. And needless to say, I don't want to talk more about that. The topic of routine replacing technology change and algorithms, these are the two things that for me, media, on the media side, are the two things that I think are the most important existentially, because I think for the first time ever, we have to face the reality that we're having a systematic change in how we're going to work. And are you going to be at the beginning of that change? Are you going to be at the end of that change? Are you going to participate in it? Are you going to be controlled by it? Are you going to take the opportunity of it? And I'm not going to go into these topics in detail, but I started to realize when I myself started to look at my business knowledge in media, and I started to realize that to move further in media, I need to understand how to deal with moving away from the limitation of geography and moving away from the limitation of language. I started to look for solutions, and I started to realize, holy cow, I can produce content in multiple languages today. What does that mean for business? How can I learn more about this? How can I invest my time in this? Because if you're, for example, a magazine brand like Cosmopolitan, you've got 60 editions already, but you've got an analog world infrastructure, and that's a liability. You need to be able to think lean and agile, and you need to embrace technology. But you know what blocks that? People and infrastructure and legacy. So anyway, let's move on very, very quickly. These big shifts that I see, I say this pendulum because, very often we don't feel the movement of change. But I see things right now like this pendulum swinging backwards and forwards. And you see sometimes people flying off the end and grabbing onto the end. And I really, that's a manifestation of how I see things right now. I mentioned this in my previous presentation. I read an awful lot of books. I'm always consuming knowledge because I'm trying to match it to my business and find the lessons for the media business, because I do believe that the word even media is out of date, because it's called media because we previously owned the medium of distribution. We no longer own the medium of distribution, but then what is media? Media is the thing that basically we put on the paper, or we put in the digital environment. Or is media the thing that mediates between people? I'm more of the believer that we mediate between people through content that increases people's knowledge of the world around them. But this changing world, Jeremy Rifkin in his most recent book, he said that, we're on this massive change. And this, you can feel it. We're moving from the mass to the tribe. There was this mass media, and now it's very much in the niche. If you look at this concept of global to local to global, for the first time ever, a small publisher in one language can actually go global in multiple languages, or a small designer in Krakow can actually get access to the US market, or a small technology developer, through using natural language, can actually translate and communicate their software using cloud services to anybody around the world. So the dynamics have changed so exponentially, it's quite remarkable. We're also moving back in a way to this kind of old world of, so we are cavemen, right? I know we're all very well dressed, and but you need to have a few kids to realize, especially boys, that at the end of the day, we are still operating with a 100,000-year-old system, in our brains. And we still like to do things that enable us to be human, which is ultimately what we all are, right? Which is to collaborate, to find community, to find commonality. And many of the things that I've actually started to realize, because I'm a natural observer, it's my background in psychology and philosophy that makes me this way. I've had more conversations with Ukrainian Uber drivers in Warsaw than anywhere in my life. And I ask them all, why are they here? And they say, it's so much better than in the Ukraine. And I'm thinking, okay, that's so interesting. It's changing the dynamics of the world around us, these capabilities of platforms to be able to shift us and move us, and to be able to do so and make money simultaneously. So I would recommend these two books. I have to confess, I'm halfway through the first one, The Brief History of Humankind, but I already bought the second one because somebody really recommended it to me. So I would suggest that you grasp one. They're very thick, but I think it's really, if you want to know where you're going to, you need to know where you're coming from. And if you want to remain in that process, connected really to your customers, you have to focus on the human attributes of the relationship with the customer. And this, shift of industry paradigm, it's moving from the industrial age into the era of the thought economy. And that means that you all have to think for yourselves. You can't assume that somebody else is going to think for you, because in my opinion, if you do that, you're actually bypassing what is really important in this day, which of editorial post-truth, which is critical reasoning. I mean, you really have to understand how to have critical reasoning and to be able to look at things with your own perspective, which is not common in the world around us. But I think coming from an emerging market of Central Europe, you guys can all understand how important it is to have freedom of speech, to have freedom of mind, to have mental emancipation, and to actually drive your own futures forward. For the first time ever, technology enables that to happen. So you can actually live and work anywhere and still stay at home in your house in Krakow, in fact, as long as you're prepared to extend your mental boundaries. I'll move on here. I mean, I mentioned this previously, that, you know, we do believe at the end of the day that things are moving very fast. But when we're sitting in this room with a closed door and the walls around us, in fact, the world is moving at a very high velocity. So everything is about perception. You can choose not to feel it, but it'll happen to you anyway. You can choose to embrace it, and you can be scared out of your wits and have paralysis. You know, or you can decide to take the surfer's example, where you know your limitations, but you're progressively improving upon them day by day. You're perfectly happy to have a complete collapse, which in business would be called failure, but in actual science it's called iterative prototyping, because the only thing after you've explored all the things that something is not is what left is what it is. So I would submit to you that in media it's exactly the same thing, and if you're in marketing, you have to understand that for the first time ever we have full transparency on performance. Therefore, you can embrace the fact that certain things are going to work, or you can find the suitable lie to cover up the fact that it didn't and delude yourself. My view would be, it's a bit like the technology that the Hungarian programmer designed called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. I believe that we're living in the world of what you see is what you get, but it's really important to have the critical analysis to make sure that what you see is actually what you want and that it's the truth. Pace layering. I will move on because I don't want to take some time from our colleagues at SAS, but we have this, the unchanged. I mean, so as I mentioned to you before, this 100,000-year-old working system that we have in our heads, what's unchanged is the need for trust, reliability, and belonging, and our love of image and illustration, and the love of storytelling and touch. I mean, these are attributes that are unchanging. It doesn't matter what product it is that you're dealing with and what form of media you're in or what medium you are. But like kids, you know, I mean, what the great thing about having kids is that they drive you mad with their whys. Why? And then at the end of the day, we grow up and we learn to work in institutions that tell us, don't ask, just do. And then we lose the ability to exercise critical reasoning. So I would suggest to you that, and now what we're doing is, you know, you've got guys, I mean, Simon Sinek, I think he's got like 450,000 Facebook fans or something, you know, like, and I love him because he just talks about the practicalities of critical reasoning, which is if in business you can't, or in media, you can't actually drill it right down to what it is that you do. I know what I do. I think I bring a level of transparency to the average working man. That's what I do, or woman. I take those big ideas and I try to make them relevant through media so that people can understand what does it mean for me, because at the end of the day, that's what people want to know. What does it mean for me? So I would suggest that you, if you haven't done it yet, that you follow after Simon and you have a look at what he talks about. It's very simple. And in this digital world, of course, you know, we're all selling the same thing. We're all selling the same. It reminds me of the snake oil, you know, in the early days of the gold rush, you know. Human beings, they need curation. They need recommendation. Not Google search. That's the telephone book. Yeah, the nearest and the most commonly used. But they want to know that you know what they're thinking so that you can give a valued recommendation that they can trust and they can be assured of is the right one. And you might have known that in the last 6 months or heard about it, that there's this big discussion about Facebook being a platform but not responsible for editorial content, and that the binary nature of social media creates echo chambers, so all you hear is what you want to hear, which we all know, if we're in relationships with other people, is the death wish to all relationships, because you need to be able to listen to the opposing point of view. And in this paradox of choice that we have, it's much easier to look for things that look the same as you, and it's much more difficult as a media business to try to understand the point of view of your ideal opponent. So I think for media, our world as editors, the technology is not our business. The technology is the board. The editor is the surfer. The technology is the wave that's coming. And the editor or the media is the person who's looking at it and saying, okay, this is an opportunity that I can take that's relevant to me at this moment in time, because it's commensurate with the capabilities that I have in terms of my team, my geography, my language, my core purpose, my core mission as a media, because not all companies have the same mission, and that's why it comes back to the why. Like, what's the purpose of what am I doing? Am I trying to sell a service like a media marketing would, or am I trying to sell engagement, or am I trying to actually sell a mission, maybe like a news publication would, or am I trying to be a social coherent, collaboration mechanism? So I always use the example of dobra rada. Now, I know I've completely and utterly screwed that up in Polish, but dobra rada, for example, and I'm not going to upset Alex at Burda by saying this, but, by speaking about my previous world, but I always remember, that there was a lady in the market research that said, when I read dobra rada, it's like listening to my mum tell me the advice that she would give me. It's a little bit out of date, but I always feel that it's solid advice. And I remember thinking, wow, that is really profound for me. Or I always remember, for example, that, when we did something on Claudia with, we had this video, and it was, how to turn a serviette into a lotus flower. And we had millions of views, and we couldn't understand why, until we realized that in Brazil it had 50,000 shares, because, in Brazil, the fact that it was a Polish song with a Polish serviette, it didn't matter, because that lady in Brazil, she wanted to know how to turn that damn serviette into a lotus flower probably as many times as she had to go around the table and do it. That's why we had 50,000 shares and millions of views. So, your content can travel. So just keep that in mind, that, your content is your personality, and your content can travel now as far as you could possibly imagine. So as editors, we have to focus on the future. And we have these different types of premises, of course, that are, supported by certain forms of argumentation here, like that high quality content in terms of, is actually the truth. That's how I see it, that our role is as in media is to be the purveyors of truth by putting our readers first, not the ad dollar. We build social community, and we are the social glue. Media is that. That we have to have an omnipresent content delivery system, and the future models of media will emerge from the hyperlocal and with the global capabilities of platforms enabled by zero language barrier, in my opinion. I still believe in the value of print, because you know what? People love curation, and if you actually observe print, forget about it as the means of distribution, but for what it does as a product itself. It has this finite value to it. So it's not a means as a mass means of communication. It's a means of curation that moves into the management of the value of scarcity, not supply, which means you can price higher. I think that we're moving beyond this digital mobile first thought process, and we're moving radically into this data-driven approach and instant content creation for people that is directly personalized. So where do you play in that environment? We were speaking about it there earlier on, like, you're not talking about telling people what was said in the past that might be of interest to them, but telling people what they need to know in the future that hasn't been written yet or hasn't been said yet. So, get game ready. Remember, the old rules are the biggest liability. Align your staff's dreams with your dreams. I think this is extremely important. If you're in media, I think, you have a passion and a mission. I mean, or at least that's how it used to be. I mean, media people in the past, they had a passion and a mission, and then along came advertising in the 50s. And in the 50s, that, as it paid the bills, it kind of, enabled us to get away with not being very critical about the value proposition of the content that we were creating. But now more than ever, I think the only people left standing are going to be those people who really are passionate, mission-driven publishers. And I'm not meaning magazine publishers. I'm talking about content publishers. Content being for all platforms. So this new model, in my opinion, it's geography, language, and platform agnostic. It's follow the reader wherever they are, literally, even if it means climbing up the top of the tree. It's from engagement to transaction, because of course I believe that e-commerce is the end game probably at the end rather than advertising in the future, or even now in fact. And being impactful authorities on the new platforms. I mean, I put these pictures of these girls here for the last time for a specific reason, because, when we're dealing with content, we have to understand that content is a form of neurolinguistic programming. When I said it 4 years ago about Kim Kardashian, I was just annoyed. Then I started to look at the social implications of the distribution of content that's actively manipulated to influence your mind. And then I started to realize the power of what we do and the absolute imperative that we have to follow through to make sure that we are the human-made part of the piece. Because 50% of the content reporting that was done for the Olympics was robot journalism. A lot of the content that went on, I think it was nearly 50% on Facebook, that was, generating a lot of buzz around the elections in the US. That was robot journalism. I mean, you need to know the difference between an opinion of a person and the opinion of a robot that's aggregated specifically to influence your mind. This you need to be understanding of. So get game ready and watch out for the unpriced externalities that can kill you, because you might be sitting in a boat that somebody's telling you is going in the right way, but in fact it might not be, because it's in their interest to have you there, because they need you to help steer the boat for as long as they possibly can. Now, that's okay, because that's fine. You need to know what wave to pick, as I said, because sometimes you need to stay on the beach. But if you are really interested in innovation, as I told you at the beginning, the innovation starts with the individual sitting at the table, and you need to understand whether or not you're game ready or not. So we're at the beginning of the story as media, in my opinion. We are starting with a huge amount of responsibility to help the world around us navigate this totally disrupted fourth industrial revolution that we are going through. So now, you must appreciate the fact also, if you're in marketing, that, your message is permanent. So if you lie once, it follows you for an eternity. So be sentient of this, because in this world, we understand that the lie can run around the world faster than the truth can catch up with it. But it's permanent, so it doesn't go away. So keep that in mind when it also comes to product history as well. So the changing attitude in today's world that counts is constantly changing mood, being curious, open, flexible, no barriers, and a very beginner's mindset. I think you need to be prepared constantly for a day where, you don't know. And we're used to this caveman brain feeling that we need to know everything to be in control. I've been working for 30 years, my next birthday. 3-0. I can tell you I've always been learning, and I've always stretched my arm. My stretch has been always further than my grasp. It was a very pivotal moment when I stood in Portland in November talking about the meaning of content to a full room of translation technology companies, where the global head of localization from Alibaba was there, the global head of localization for Netflix, and I was pleading with them to understand that content is full of tacit knowledge, that if you codify language to a degree that makes it simpler for machine translation, we're going to lose the essence of what language is, which is meaning. So please don't let that happen. And I had to stretch out beyond my grasp to be able to stand there. And I was so thrilled when they didn't boo me out of the room and they said, "We don't quite understand what you're saying, but we're really interested in talking." And I think you need to take this mindset of pushing yourselves beyond your boundaries and be comfortable with doing that. But to understand that sometimes you have to be sure the people in the room are interested in what you have to say. So, life is a process of becoming a combination of states we have to go through, where people fail as they wish to elect a state and remain in it. This is a kind of death. And at this particular moment in time in media, our role is to be not necessarily the advocates of change, but the advocates of comprehension. So what does it mean for me to be able to help our audiences to be able to transcend what is going to be a wave that comes anyway, because technology is ubiquitous. It's not going to stop. And you can try to stop it, but then we end up going back in time. So, we have to be aware. Now, to this end, what I've decided to do was to, as I'm studying and I'm working on this project with Enterprise Ireland, I decided to set up the first Polish chapter of the Singularity University. I was very lucky that Burda sponsored me attending the executive program in 2015, and I really felt when I attended that program at the SU, the executive program, I learned one thing, and it's like about mindset, that you can have a small solution to a small problem, but when you can network the world, you understand that your small solution can be a big solution to a big problem. And I take this mindset and I submit to you that thinking big is as difficult as thinking small. So if you feel that you're actually interested in knowing more about how exponential technology can influence the world around you, how you can use exponential technology to create solutions to address the world's greatest challenges, and they come from the smallest corners of the universe, these answers. So think big. Understand that you have this capability that many people in Europe don't have, which is this mental agility because of your history. Please check out our Facebook page and keep posted, or send us a message if you're interested in more details, and I would love to chat. So thank you very much, and hopefully I didn't run too much over time. 1 minute, great.